guys in the dark.
As soon as I was old enough to understand the word, I knew my grandfather was one. It wasn't until I was much older that I had realized everyone else around me had known it too. My grandfather had frightened me, and it wasn't just me who was terrified of him. He seemed to have hold over everybody, even grown men who were much bigger and stronger than he was. It was an unspoken rule in the family to never upset him. So when I suggested that his behavior towards myself and the other children in the family was pervy, I quickly learned to never suggest that ever again. The stereotype of an abuser in the family is that they are manipulative and seem normal, just like everybody else. When it's revealed that all along they had been hurting people, everybody is shocked. They seemed so loving. They seemed so nice. They seemed like the last person who could be capable of hurting anybody. My grandfather had never fit that stereotype. He didn't try to hide that he was sexually inappropriate. He was what the adults in the family affectionately described as a dirty old man. He was constantly touching other women. He was groping them, making suggestive remarks. This was seen as an endearing trait, even by some of the women that he was touching. He means no harm. He's only playing. And people need to learn to take a joke, were phrases repeated throughout the years. The repetition protected him because he was allowed to get away with this behavior for a very, very long time. He never tried to hide what an awful person he was. In fact, he was brazen. He was unashamed his whole life. It was common knowledge that he used to beat my grandmother and the children. I grew up hearing stories of how he would beat my father as a child, going as far as to break his nose. He had even pressed my father's face into the grate of a fireplace when it was lit. Sometimes his punishments were really sadistic, one of them being he would whip my father with a belt, and if he cried out in pain, he would whip him much harder. This story was somehow romanticized. He suffered a stroke, and that had transformed his personality. He had seen the errors of his ways. He stopped beating his wife and the children. It's no coincidence that the stroke happened as his sons were becoming men. I believe the fact that they were old enough to fight back was the reason that he stopped beating them. But this was told with such passion and warmth that I, along with the rest of the family, had believed it to be some sort of inspirational story. The abuse didn't stay within the family. There were rumors that he had forced people to have sex with him in his youth. But again, the story was spun in such a way that somehow no one had ever addressed these rumors. It was in the past. He was young, and it was a different time back then. They were all things that were told time and time again, just so it would be served as protection for him. It was obvious that this man was a predator. As a child, I had felt frustrated and confused. He made me very uncomfortable and took too much of an interest in me. I really couldn't understand why I happened to be the only one who could see him for what he really was, and why no one ever listened to me. I started to think that I had made this whole thing up. When everyone around you is acting like you are oversensitive, you just start to believe it. Maybe it was true that he meant no harm. Maybe I did need to learn to take a joke. I really, really tried. I couldn't see what was funny about being catcalled, groped, and objectified by my own grandfather. One day I made a fuss. I was leaving at the end of a family visit. He had come right behind me and cupped my chest, lifted me up off the ground, and the pain in my breast was excruciating. I happened to be 13 at the time. I didn't understand exactly what was going on, but I did understand that it wasn't right. The adults in the family were quick to pacify it. "Oh, we know you. We're only playing. You don't know your own strength. She's just upset because you actually hurt her. That's all. She'll be fine later on." I wasn't fine. I blamed myself for that incident. For so many years. I was overreacting. I could have gotten him into a lot of trouble. Part of me wishes that I had gotten him into trouble. The other part of me knows he could have just evaded the trouble, because every concrete evidence wasn't enough for the trouble to catch up with him. Up until that point, the only evidence that I had was seen as weak. He was doing enough for it to not exactly be okay, but not quite enough to get him into trouble. Everything was easily explained. That was until my very brave little sister had come forward. At 8 years old, she did exactly the thing that all the adults in the family should have done, but they had refused to do so. She protected the children. I wasn't present at the time. I made some kind of excuse about homework, so I didn't have to visit him. As far as I was aware, I was the only child in the family he behaved inappropriate towards. If I had known the truth, I wouldn't have let my little sister go there by herself and have to be brave without any kind of support. Our cousin had married a woman who already had children. Two of these children were girls who were close to my sister's age. As they were playing together at my grandfather's house, the oldest of the girls told my sister that my grandfather had been touching her private places. The youngest, who happened to be 4, also revealed that he had been doing the same to her. Although my sister had been conditioned her entire life to doubt her own perception of my grandfather's behavior, she acted with such certainty. She told our parents, and the police were called. And she, not my grandfather, suffered all of the consequences. The family called her a liar, swore at her, tried to bully her into backing down. They even threatened the girls, even blaming the oldest for being too sexual, because she liked sitting on her uncle's lap. She was 7 years old, and she was black. I do believe that this has a huge factor in why they tried to sexualize her behavior. I believe that it was one of the reasons my grandfather was abusing her. No one liked her because she wasn't blood, and even though no one wanted to admit it, they didn't like her because she wasn't white. None of the adults had protected the children. They seemed to think calling the police was enough. They allowed my sister and the 2 girls to be screamed at, insulted, and blamed. As much as they had tried, they couldn't stop my sister. She was an advocate for the girls and bravely spoke about the abuse that she suffered herself. This seemed to prompt our children in the family to come forward, including my other sister. I had asked my mother if I should come forward too. She had discouraged me. I was so confused and beaten down by the years of conditioning, and he hadn't hurt me in the way that the girls had reported. It never went that far. As an adult, I understand feeling uncomfortable was too far. But as a child, I had compared my experiences to others, and I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. Although I had given evidence to the police about things that I had witnessed, that my grandfather harassing and being inappropriate towards women inside and outside of our family. I never told them about what happened to me. My father was present in the interview and discouraged me from elaborating on how my grandfather had made sexual remarks about my body and would slap my backside in a sexually aggressive way. Even in a police interview, an adult in my family was protecting him. The case went to court. The vast majority of the family were on his side. Even my aunts and uncles had supported him. Despite the fact some of their children had been abused, I was devastated, but not surprised at their loyalty to him. Although I feel angry and let down by the adults in my family, I understand that they all had been groomed. It doesn't justify any of their actions. But I really don't think that they consciously realized they knew there was a pedophile in the family. I was 11 years old when I moved to the Massachusetts area from the New Hampshire area. I was an awkward girl. I didn't make friends easily. Everything in the house had carpet except for the attic. It took a pull-down ladder to get up into, and it gave off an unfinished, creepy vibe. Also, it was in my room, so it had creeped me out even more. One day I was left home alone on a Friday night. My parents were out. My little brother to a friend's house. I had invited a friend over to my house because I was bored. Shortly after, she came. We started making cookies and making popcorn to watch a movie. As we were watching the movie, I had heard footsteps coming from upstairs. I dismissed them at first, thinking that it was just outside. But right after the footsteps had come back, it worried me. My friend had left around 9:30, left me all alone in my big house with those creepy footsteps. Me being a stupid 12-year-old, I went upstairs with a bat and just went off to bed. I really couldn't sleep that night. So I took a shower. After I started changing, did I see a flash? It alarmed me and freaked me out. I screamed and cried, but it fell on deaf ears because no one was home and couldn't be home until Sunday morning. I went over to the phone and debated on calling the police, but thought against it many, many times. So I went back into my room cautiously. I heard the footsteps once again. They were unmistakably coming from the attic. In my room. I was freaking out. I cried silently as I had gotten into bed. I saw another flash of the camera. This went on for the rest of the night. Saturday, early morning, which was the very next day, I had enough. I ran to the room across, and I dialed 911. I was grateful to see the police at my doorstep within minutes. I took them in my room, showed them the pull-down rope to pull down the ladder. They pulled the door down, went up the stairs. They were shocked at what they had seen. They took pictures and showed me. There were pictures of me all over the walls, and some blood, some of my clothing, and my personal diary that I thought I lost. I was horrified and shocked. I passed out. As the ambulance that was called shortly after, one of the officers had spotted a man lurking near the house. They arrested him, pulled up his record. He had an assortment of charges ranging from sexual assault, even murder. After I recovered from my fall, an officer told me that the man they had arrested after I passed out was indeed the man who was staying and living in the attic. They assumed that he started living there as soon as my family had moved into the house. Turns out, the man living upstairs in the attic had been stalking me, following me wherever I went, undetected. Also, that he was a registered offender, had his plans on taking away a child's innocence, such as myself, at the very time. I decided after that incident happened that I would move out of that room. I went to the other room. My old room where this happened is currently unoccupied since the police had put up their caution tape all over it. Since it's still a scene of disturbing and what could have been an unforeseen demise to my death. My grandfather had managed to talk his way out of everything, could convince people to be loyal to him, despite how openly cruel and predatory he was. With the help of family members, he had managed to convince me that I had some sort of personality flaw, which made me perceive his behavior incorrectly. I had been perceiving everything correctly, and surely the justice system would too. He was sentenced to 10 years on the offender's registry, 5 years in prison, but that was reduced to 2 on account of his age. He was released early for good behavior, served a total of 18 months. The family had welcomed him back with open arms. Meanwhile, his victims had remained unsupported. He received protection in prison as he used his skills of intimidation and deception to climb to the top of the hierarchy. When he was released, he desperately wanted to go back to where he was respected and protected, outside of prison. Everybody knew that he was, and he feared for his safety. He decided that he would break his bail conditions, approach his granddaughters. He openly told the family he intended to do this. Upon hearing that, these were his intentions. Me, my parents, and my sisters were forced to flee our home. Meanwhile, he had stayed protected and supported by the entire family. Inevitably, he went to re-offend. He befriended his elderly neighbors, abused their granddaughter. He went back to prison for a short time. When he was released, he was cared for in a nursing home until his death. Despite being in prison twice, he never served the 5 full years of his initial sentence. Meanwhile, his victims had served a much harsher sentence, completely unsupported. My sisters and I had to navigate our own healing journeys and grieve for the childhoods that we never had. I lost touch with all of my cousins. I largely suspect that they felt the same. Outing an abuser doesn't ruin their lives. They still have groomed people, other than the children that they abused. Often, this ensures their protection. The only lives that it ruins are those of their family. The children have to recover from the trauma of being abused and re-traumatization of not being believed. The adults in the family go through a grieving process, especially if that was their parent or even their spouse. Marriages break up, not just the marriages of the offender and the wife or partner, but also the marriages of the couple's grown children, which means that grandchildren are affected as well. In-laws can also be affected. Women married to the sons of men who have been convicted of sex offenses may withdraw emotionally and even sexually, leading to the breakdown of their marriages. I happen to be a girl. I'm in my early teens, so keep this in mind while I tell the story. This all happened in March of this year. I was pretty terrified to take a bus after this incident. So like any usual day, I was taking a public transit bus home after school, except for it was a later bus than usual. I had badminton practice after school, so this bus I never took home. I got out of the practice at 5 p.m. The next bus was at 6:30, so that means me having to wait an hour and a half for the very next one. For the most part, I had just played on my phone. The bus times for this particular bus I was taking are usually messed up. Sometimes people have to wait over an hour for the next bus. Just a heads up, this bus takes about an hour to get to the bus stop near my house. My bus finally came. I got on. I took a seat down next to two people. The two people had gotten off really quickly, so I wasn't surrounded by anybody, because usually the back of the bus is the quietest. I was looking at my phone, texting people like I usually do, and some guy who happened to be in his 20s had gotten on, sat right next to me. I'm going to call him Devin. I didn't think anything about it. Just someone getting on and sitting right next to me. This is usually the typical Canadian thing. I noticed he had a bag. It had an Xbox One in it. I thought that he was lucky to have one. After about 30 minutes sitting silently, he had said something along the lines of, "Hello, how are you?" I replied with, "I'm good, thanks. You?" Then he kept on talking until he had to get off. I was getting off in the next few stops. I wasn't really worried about being lonely. I thought that he was nice. Until someone who was sitting 5 seats away from me said something. I'll call this dude Jim. Jim had said he's known the guy for a while, but not in a good way. He said that he happened to like to touch children. Not to talk to him again. My heart was pounding. I got off the bus. I was thinking about what Devin had said. One of the things he said was, "Do you have an extra TV at home? I need it for my Xbox." I told him no. Now I'm wondering if he was trying to get to my house, take down the address so that he can come back whenever he wanted. I really didn't want that to happen. I said that we didn't have any extra TVs, not that we do anyways. Before he had gotten off, I was scared that he was going to follow me home. But then he had gotten off. I was really relieved at this point. I walked home, paranoid as hell. Be careful who you talk to, because even the most nicest of people can turn out to be the worst person that you've ever met.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.